I'm hopeful that this will be somewhat interactive, and that you won't have to do any mucking around with Zoom. That'll all be on me. So feel free to unmute yourself if you have something you want to ask. And I am going to ask you guys some questions. So let's go ahead and get started. So, can you guys read?
Yeah.
Yes. How do you know?
Because well, I can hear.
Right.
Yeah,
And you know you can hear,
yeah.
but how do you know when you're
I
reading?
heard the question, so that doesn't prove I can read though.
Right. How do
Because
you
I
know?
learned. Because I learned.
Okay. But when you read today, what tells you that you're reading and not listening? Or maybe the better question is, how do you notice when you're not reading and there's words in front of you?
Oh, I always read when there's words in front of me. I can't stop.
I understand, Jeff.
Hard question. I multitask. I have the TV on. I'm watching the hurricane. I'm doing this.
Well,
So,
tell me if Ian does anything exciting, because Ian is my 30-year-old son. And so this is now our running joke is when did he become a hurricane? So, but surely you all have had experiences where you've been reading and all of a sudden you realize you're not thinking about what you're reading.
oh yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So that's kind of what I'm thinking about here is there are times when we read, but we're not really engaged with what we're reading.
Well, you know, you get so many inputs, you get inputs from family, you get inputs from stuff or what's going on in the day and your mind wanders. So sometimes it's very hard to stay on track.
Right.
Because you're getting inputs constantly coming from thousands of directions.
So what about when it's quiet? Does this still ever happen to anybody? Please don't make me be the only one this ever happens to.
Yeah, I'll go off track. Yeah.
If I'm familiar with the subject too much, I'll just read the words and not realize what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you'll space out a little bit, right?
Sure.
Or if something traumatic is happening, you're in the middle of the hurricane and you're trying to keep your mind off it, but you're reading a book and then there's this loud noise.
Well, I don't go to hurricanes. I
don't either, but I'm just, I mean, yesterday I heard there was a little hail yesterday.
Yes.
Around here.
Yes, it was.
So, I think that bothered some people. So when you're reading, what do you think about?
Is it fiction or nonfiction?
Good question.
Fiction, I always picture what I'm reading pretty much. In nonfiction, not so much.
Okay. So Jeff, I never understood that idea of picturing what you read. In my entire life, 58 years, I rarely picture what I read.
I do it all the time.
Right. But not everybody does.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I was an adult and was teaching that I realized I don't do that. I also don't think I dream very much. And if I do, it's in stories.
Are you human?
I am human, but I don't picture things very well in my mind. Okay. So what about, so you said if it's fiction, you picture it, right?
Generally.
If it's nonfiction, how do you know you're reading it then if you don't picture it?
Well, I know in my case, if I'm reading nonfiction, I'm reading it for a specific purpose. I have an intention set for why I'm reading a piece of nonfiction. And in those cases, I take notes.
You take notes. So that's part of what you're doing, right?
Yeah. I'm underlining, I'm taking notes in the margin, I'm making documents all over the place. That's how I do it with nonfiction. With fiction, I'm similar to you, Lisa. I don't visualize in my mind as much, but I try to when I find myself in those moments where I'm 3 pages past where I started and I don't remember anything of what happened, I have to go back. So, and try to recreate it a little bit, but I'm like you, I don't visualize in my mind
Yeah,
with nonfiction, so.
thank you. Thank you for that. Maya,
Yeah.
could you invite someone to join us? I sent her the link and it's not working for her. Her email is LJUBACK.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Sorry, hurry,
Nope.
hurry,
Sorry.
hurry, sorry, everyone.
What was the email?
LJUBACK@comcast.net.
Okay.
And email her and say, we're on. I'm sorry she can't get in. I don't know. I don't, sometimes this happens and we don't have good explanation for it. So I apologize. So Lynn, I'm sorry, Rebecca, what I hear you saying is that you're thinking about what you're reading while you read it,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So how many of you like to read?
I do.
You
I
do?
Yeah.
I wonder if we've sort of self-selected here, people who like to read.
Probably.
Probably. Okay.
Mhm.
I think there's probably some of that here too. Although I know I have some tutors who don't really enjoy reading. So it's fine either way, right? So I wanted to know why people are here. And Kevin said he's going to be working with a student who he thinks is working on their GED.
Mhm.
And so I assume you want to know, how do I help somebody who's working at that level read better,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
What about the rest of you?
Hi, this is Kathy.
Hi, Kathy.
Well, I'm an ESL tutor and I've done reading with advanced students and working with a more beginner student at this point whose English language is still at a fairly low level, but we have started reading. So I'm here to, I guess, gather additional information on how possibly to work with beginning language students in reading.
Great. I'm sorry, I want to check and see if this is the tutor who can't get on. Literacy Bits. Yeah, we're trying. I don't know why, Lynn. My colleague is trying to send you another message and hopefully that link will work. I don't think so. Sometimes we have trouble. If you don't get in, no, it will be recorded and you can watch it later, okay? I'm very sorry. I don't know what the problem is. Okay, thanks. Okay, thank you. Okay, sorry about that.
Hi, this is Rich.
Yeah.
I have one student who is, she's fluent when it comes to conversational language, okay?
Right.
She does have difficulty with some reading because mainly her vocabulary is somewhat limited.
Right.
Or inference is probably her biggest issue, of being able to read between the lines of what the author is saying versus what the author is not saying but means to say, okay?
Uh-huh.
And that's a critical part. Another thing here is she's also trying to improve her writing skills because she's looking at getting a degree in psychology. So she needs that comprehension from a reading standpoint, but at the same time, she has to be able to write, we'll say, formally and academically.
Right.
What's really interesting now is she's starting to notice nuance. Like, for instance, when a comma is not added to a sentence, it has a whole different meaning.
Right.
And so I've been bringing up a lot of things with her to read and change the meaning of it just by moving commas around. And she just finds it not only challenging, but enjoyable at the same time. She's always surprised by interpretation based on how important punctuation is.
Yeah. Yeah, I think many of us who aren't always careful with our punctuation are surprised when we see a sentence like that, where the meaning just totally changes based
Right.
on
And then
punctuation.
my second student, and I teach them separately because they're at different levels and have come in at different times. It's interesting with her is her reading comprehension is a little bit stronger. She has a much better base of vocabulary. But now what I have her reading books for pleasure,
Mhm.
and she's starting to notice how character development becomes part of a story. So I'm really excited to see that she's starting to look at reading not just from a standpoint of taking in facts and trying to learn the culture, but now she's starting to see, the nuance in writing style, which is really kind of cool.
And you only begin to get that at a certain level of reading, right? When
Yeah.
you're still working on the beginning level things that I think Kathy's student is still working on, you can't get to those nuances. So Kathy, I don't know how much of what we're going to say tonight is going to be helpful to you, but hopefully just thinking about reading in terms of what else is involved will be helpful and will sort of shed some light on some of what's going on in Karina's mind. Okay.
Sure.
Anybody else? Anybody want to answer any other questions here? What are you noticing?
Caitlin,
Strengths or
this is
weaknesses?
Pam.
Yeah, Pam.
I had a question about Rich's student though. Rich, what is your student ESL or is she born and raised here? The one who's understanding nuance in her reading. Is she
They're both ESL.
both ESL? Okay.
Yes, one is from China,
Oh, okay.
and the one who's looking at appreciating style of writing,
Mhm.
and the other one is from Saudi Arabia.
Okay, thanks.
So the interesting thing here is I may tell you a story later about an American-born student with a high school diploma who I worked with, who had some of these same issues that Rich is talking about, right? But I don't want to go there right now, right? It doesn't, yes, some of it is very pronounced when you're working with a non-native English speaker, but there are other issues that American-born students bring to reading that are similar or also maybe not so expected to you, okay? And they involve more things to do with thinking while they read, right? I've had a number of students say, well, I read it, but I don't remember it. Well, Rebecca would tell us, I think, if she doesn't remember it, she didn't really read it. I know that's, if I can't tell you about it, how do you know you read it, right? Now, maybe I can tell you just little pieces of it to prove that I read it. It was about this person, it took place here, and it was this kind of a story, right? That's really rudimentary. That isn't enough to prove comprehension, right? And we're really looking at comprehension for these higher level students. That's what they need to do. In order to make pictures in your head, you have to understand the words that you're reading in order to be able to draw comparisons between things. You have to have enough kept in your mind to compare two things together, right?
Caitlin,
So let's take a little bit, yeah, Jeff.
can you define higher level?
I am going to.
Okay.
So let's come back to that in just a minute. So what is reading? I've already tried to make you think about this a little bit. These are some of the definitions. It's the process of looking at a series of written symbols and getting meaning from them, right? It's a cognitive process that involves decoding symbols to arrive at meaning. It's also a multifaceted process involving word recognition, comprehension, fluency, and motivation. Skilled readers do most of these things most of the time. They read most of the words in a text. They read with a purpose. They somehow engage with the content. And we'll come back to this more. We'll give you some more information about what that means, we expect what we're reading to make sense. And when it doesn't, we tend to blame the writer or the material or our knowledge of what it is we're reading about. So when I read about law, I'm pretty darn sure that what I'm reading doesn't make sense to me because I don't understand it. I don't have enough background knowledge in the law. But when I'm reading about educational theories, if I don't understand it, I'll read it again. And if I still don't understand it, then I'll blame the writer, right? So, but a poor reader will almost always place the blame on themselves. I don't understand this. It's my fault, right? I think better readers don't do that as much, okay? Does anybody here disagree with me?
No, but so you're saying poor readers blame themselves.
Poor readers don't know that what they're reading is supposed to make sense most of the time.
Okay.
So, and I think I'll have some examples of this for you in a bit, Kevin.
Okay.
So you can say, yeah, I expect it to make sense and it doesn't make sense, but I know why it doesn't make sense, okay? We also tend to adjust the speed of our reading to the purpose and the difficulty of the text. So when I'm reading for fun, I read fast. I read to find out what's going to happen next, right? When I'm reading to learn something, I do what Rebecca said she does. I take notes, I underline, I make marks places. I try to ask myself, what am I learning here? The other thing that skilled readers do is they're willing to take risks. So when you are learning to read, it's helpful to have somebody who you trust, who you can say, what does this word mean? Or it's helpful to have a way to go find out what that word means, right? But a poor reader is more likely, and this stuff is research-based. Don't take my word for it. We could find the research, but I don't have it right here. The poor reader is more likely to say, I should know that. I don't know that. I should know it. Since I don't know it, I'm not going to ask anybody because I should know it, right? So these are defensive mechanisms that people have gotten built up. All right, so Jeff had asked me, what am I talking about when I'm talking about an advanced reader? And for our purposes tonight, I'm going to say that an advanced reader is someone who tests at about what we call an NRS 3, or intermediate adult basic level. They are reading at about a 6th grade level, right? I remember learning when I was young, and I confirmed this with someone who's an editor today, that most newspapers in the US are written at about a 6th grade level. Some of them may be written a little bit higher than that. So 6th grade is what most people can read at comfortably, right? If you're going to go on to college, you need to read a little bit higher than that. This advanced reader is also someone who can read most of the words on the page, someone who can retain what they read and do something with that information, and someone who understands or comprehends what they read. Does that make sense to you?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to give you an example of a 5th grade text. And here it is. So I'm not going to read it all. You don't want to see yourselves. Sorry, I'm trying to move you out of the way of my notes. You don't have to read this, but this is an example of some text, the sort of text we might give if we were doing a supplementary reading test for someone. We would ask the student to read it silently and be ready to read it aloud. When they're ready, they read it aloud. We listen for them to listen to how they read it. Do they make mistakes? Can they read things like the word gene? Or do they read geen? Or do they stop? Do they have trouble with compound words like paperback, or a word like necessarily, right? So we're listening for things like that. And then at the end, we're also listening for, does it sound fluent? Or are they reading word by word, right? And then when we finish having them read it, we ask them to tell us about what they read, right? I have had people who say, after reading something like this, it's about a guy who used to like to read. That's true, but it isn't very much detail, right? The more detail you can give, the more likely you are to have understood it, okay? So I want to show you a really effective way to help someone's understand what to do while they're reading. This is called Think Aloud. And you may remember Roberta doing something with this during your training. If you don't, that's fine. We're going to do it anyway. So the way it works is you tell the student, you're going to read a piece of text out loud. And as you read, you're going to say what it is you're thinking, okay? It takes a little bit of practice. I don't know how good I'll be at it, but I'm going to try it. You select a fairly short passage at a level that's kind of difficult for the student, right? The student's going to have the passage in front of them. They're going to follow along as you read and as you tell them what you're thinking about, right? And your thinking could include things like making a prediction about what the text will be based on what you've already seen, either the title, illustrations, or what's already happened. You can model ways to cope with difficulties you think your students might have. You can describe images. Jeff can describe images such as pictures or feelings that the text evokes. I'm good at the feelings part, Jeff. I'm just not so good at thinking what the pictures look like, right? You might also demonstrate how to link prior knowledge to the text, right? You might verbalize when you're confused and how you go about fixing that confusion, right? These are all varieties of fix-up strategies. They show someone what to do when they have a problem when they're reading. And if you're reading something like a textbook, you would show them how to use the text structures to help themselves in understanding. So we're not going to look at anything from a textbook. I've got a short piece from Clockwork Orange that a colleague gave me. So it was really a nice appetizing bit of pisha. I don't know pisha. I knew appetizing. Pisha. I wonder what that is. Well, let's keep going. Pisha. I don't know. So let's read it again. It was really a nice appetizing bit of pisha. If it's appetizing, maybe pisha is food. They laid out on the tray. Okay, it's on a tray. So maybe it is food. 2 or 3 loam ticks. I have no idea what a loam tick is. Okay, 2 or 3 loam ticks of like hot roast beef with mashed kartoffel. Oh, you know what? In Russian, kartoffel is potato, and mashed potatoes make sense with roast beef, right? So maybe kartoffel is something like potato and veg. Well, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have had a clue what veg was, but everybody talks about veg nowadays. If they watch any food TV, veg has to be vegetables, right? But it's spelled really strange. Okay, so 2 or 3 loam ticks of like hot roast beef with mashed kartoffel and veg. Then there was also ice cream and a nice hot chasha of chai. So again, I'm going to guess this is cup because chai is one way to say tea. Then there was even a cancer to smoke. and a matchbox with one match in it. So do you have a picture in your head, Jeff?
I do.
Yeah. Is it really distinct?
No, it's more like someone who's sitting at a table and confused.
Right. But you know, there's food. And what's the cancer most likely?
Or,
A
Cigarette.
cigarette, a cigar, something like that.
yeah,
Something you spoke, right? That we now agree probably contributes to cancer. So we have an idea of what's going on in this paragraph, right? We can answer some questions. We can think about it a little bit, right? Even though there's vocabulary there that we don't get, right? So I'm going to show you another one. So what if they can read it, but they don't understand it? What we just read, we kind of could read, right? We didn't understand all the words, but we can make good guesses. There was enough context around those words that they kind of made sense to us. So if they can read it, but they don't understand it, this happens a lot with American-born students, but also with higher level readers who are ESL. They can read the words, sound them out, and you ask them, what are you reading about? And they go, and they find a word, and they'll say, this word, I'm reading about this. Well, what about that? So here's another one. Jan bought a new stecker at the hardware store. She needed a stecker for her minkle. Everyone knows that a minkle won't dream if it doesn't have a good stecker. Jeff, any picture there?
Not really.
No, I don't think there's enough context there, is there? But what did Jan buy? You guys can answer that.
Stecker.
She bought a stecker, right?
which is
What did she
probably-
need the stecker for?
for Minkle.
For her minkle. Absolutely, we read it. She needed a stecker for her minkle.
Of course.
Of course, that only makes sense, right? What would have happened if Jan hadn't bought the stecker?
The Minkle would dream.
Of course. Do we understand this paragraph?
Not a clue.
Not a clue, right? We don't have any idea what we're talking about, except that it's something you might find at a hardware store, right? That's the only context we have. So if you have a student who's reading something like this, where they can read the words, but they don't understand them, we have to start by teaching vocabulary. They're never going to guess the meaning of the vocabulary from context, right? In the last one, sorry, we kind of could guess what was happening. We couldn't guess the exact meaning of all of these things. Lomtics, I would guess, is something like slices. Pisha might be snack, right? Some of them though, we're just really guessing at. But in this story, we don't really understand much of anything. Okay. So when you start teaching anything new, any new piece that you're working on, these are the steps that we kind of go through. You want to set a purpose for reading. I think Rebecca said when she's reading nonfiction, she has a reason for reading, right? Our students don't know that they need to start with a reason for reading that's something better than my teacher told me to read it. That is not a good reason for any of us to do very much, right? We'll do it, but we're not likely to remember much of what we do. So setting a purpose for reading can be really simple. If you're reading something with a picture, read the title, look at the picture, talk about the captions, ask questions. Help them to think about what they already know about what they're going to read. Build some sort of a background. Maybe if I could have given us all some context for the Stecker, more than the hardware store, maybe we could have understood more of it, right? Because to me, the paragraph makes very little sense. I couldn't come up with anything to offer as more background, right? You can pre-teach vocabulary. That works as setting a purpose for reading. It's something you can do before. If I had defined these words ahead of time, and then we'd gone ahead and read it, do you think maybe then you would have understood the paragraph? My guess is probably, right? So you want to start with a purpose for reading. Then while you're reading, a student is going, we all do this as we read, but this is something we often have to make very obvious to students by doing that think aloud process, right? The student needs to make and adjust predictions. We have to teach them to monitor their comprehension. Sometimes that means stopping every sentence or stopping every paragraph to say, tell me what you just read about, right? What did you learn? What's new here? Who are we hearing about? What's going on? Any sorts of questions like that. And then also allow the student to ask questions while they're reading, right? Afterwards, then that's a good time for questions about the whole passage, right? Maybe literal questions. Who did this? Where were they? What did they do? Maybe inferential questions. Somebody was mentioning, I think it was Rich, that his student can't do inferences. Inferences are really tough. They involve a lot of prior knowledge and making some educated guesses, right? The best way to learn them is to practice them. It's tricky, you know? And then to make to ask some evaluative questions like, did you like it? How do you feel about it? Afterwards, more advanced readers are almost always asked to summarize and paraphrase. For the GED, these are very typical things that they'll be asked to do.
Okay.
And then reactions. They're asked for reactions about what they've read. Okay, let's see. So what do you think, where do you think we could have, your student might have issues? Do you think some of these things might be issues? A lack of vocabulary. I think Rich mentioned that. A lack of interest. A lack of space and time. Kevin was talking about quiet.
You know, I think it could be a lack of just confidence, you know, and putting yourself out there, not wanting to look ridiculous or just wrong or whatever. So many people just don't take anything. They don't read
I think for adults
of that.
Yeah, I think those are really good points. For adults, we don't want to look foolish, right? And reading aloud is a really, as I think most of us remember from our childhood, reading aloud is a really good way to look foolish, right? So when you're working with an adult student, it's usually better if you do the reading aloud at least the first time, right? With ESL students, with English language learners, they're not usually quite as self-conscious about reading out loud as Americans are. I'm not sure why, but it's something I've noticed. So, you know, and different students are different. So if your student is not really wants to read aloud, by all means, let them. But I would be careful the first time not to say, read this for me, you know, because that's a really good way to make them stop reading completely. And we don't want that.
Ask a question.
Yeah.
How about if you're coming from a household that doesn't read versus one who comes from a household that does read?
Talk about it as practice, right?
Okay.
How do you get better at something? you use those muscles, right?
Mhm.
I can't run. I've never run very much. If you made me go out and run a mile, I would die. Maybe not literally, but I would fall over, right? So we want to start with really short periods of practice. For most students, 5 minutes a day, right? Read for 5 minutes every day. I don't care what you read. Read something for 5 minutes every day, right? Preferably something they want to read, because our goal is to encourage them to become readers, right? And the 5 minutes a day is reading for fun. So if that's reading an animated book, cartoon book, or reading a love story, or reading to their children out loud, or, you know, whatever, reading the news online, you know, it doesn't really matter. We want them to read for 5 minutes every day until 5 minutes is so easy that at the end of it, they don't want to stop, right? They want to read 10 minutes, but try not to push them to read more before they're ready, right? And there are other reasons too that people maybe don't want to read. Maybe they can't engage with the topic for whatever reason. They've never seen this topic before. They don't have any context for it, right? That happens fairly often, I think, to people. So these are just some things that might cause issues. And I want to just show to you, this will help for people who see things visually and not so much for those of us who don't. But this is a picture model of what goes on in the brain as you're processing information. And if you're reading, it involves this visual part, right? If you're listening, it's auditory. Are you guys getting feedback from me?
Somebody.
Yeah,
Yes.
some of you? All right, I'm hearing myself sometimes, so maybe I do need to have you guys mute unless you're asking these questions. Sorry. Any of these places, there can be a breakdown that causes the information not to get here where the thinking happens, right? It's really kind of amazing that any of us can read at all when I look at how complicated this is. And then to be able to even talk about what we read, that's yet another piece of what has to happen. And tied up with all of this is this issue of memory that we all, you know, especially as we age, we talk about how our memory's gotten worse. Well, maybe it's gotten full, you know. So I'm not sharing this with you for you to remember particularly, other than to point out that reading is really complicated, right? And so there are lots of places where things could get in the way of our students being able to do it successfully. And if you add something else onto it, like write about what you read, well, you've just added another level of difficulty, right? People can learn to do these things. Most of us have learned it, right? But it takes time and a lot of practice, a lot of encouragement sometimes. So how are we going to encourage them, right? We need to help them identify what the barriers might be. So the easiest way to start is, why don't you read? You know, and that's not meant to be pejorative. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but a lot of people don't read because they can't see it. They don't like it. They don't want to sit still. You know, I mean, we all have reasons why we don't do things we don't enjoy, right? They don't like it, so they don't do it. Makes perfect sense. But you're also not going to do it if it's hard for you. That's why I don't run. Running hurts. You know, it's never not hurt me. So why would I start? You know, so I completely understand why people don't read if they don't like it, right? But I think, granted, I know I like to read, so maybe I'm wrong about this. My belief is that if we can identify the topics that interest students, we can help them develop at least a slight interest in reading, right? Identifying those topics is key. And I've had my share of conversations with mostly young people about, you know, what do you like to do? Nothing. Well, if that's the answer, I don't know how to help you find something to read, right? That particular student was a middle schooler. So, you know, I'm hopeful most adults will be able to tell you something they like to do. But young adults aren't always able to tell you anything because their lives have been so structured up till now. They've been forced to do all these things. They haven't really explored what it is they want to do, what they might like to read. So you may have to give them some chances to try different things, right? Another thing that you might need to help them do is to figure out when they can read. For some people, first thing in the morning is a great time to read. For me, if I try to read first thing in the morning, my eyes close. So I can read at night fairly easily, but first thing in the morning just doesn't work. And then help them identify ways to get help if they have a problem when they're reading. Let's go a little bit further. I mentioned to you earlier that I had a student, an American-born student that I wanted to tell you about. She was an adult, she's an adult, perfectly, you know, she has a life. She's fine. She works cutting hair. She's very nice. She's got friends. She's married, you know, perfectly successful. But she came to me because she said, I can't read anything. I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, I read things, but I can't talk about them. And I can't talk about movies. And I just, you know, I'm always self-conscious when I'm around people. So we spent some time together. And the way I helped her begin to get over this was to start with movies and TV shows. I said, watch a movie. Your homework for this next time is to watch a movie and come back and tell me about it. And she came back and she told me about it. And it happened to be a movie that I had watched. And so I asked her some questions. I said, did you notice this? And she was like, oh, yeah. And I said, I would say that movie was about this. She said, really? So we had this whole conversation about thinking that goes along with a movie. And over time, she was able to transfer that into thinking about what she was reading, so that she now feels much more successful than she did when we started. I think that technique will work with other people as well, right? And if they can't tell you a summary, encourage them to tell you what they can tell you, right? Why do they like it? Why do they want to watch it again? Do they talk about it with other people? These are things that I do with books, right? If I read a good book, I want to tell somebody about it. And I usually explain why I like that book, right? I don't just say, you should go read this book. Go read The Hunger Games. You know, that's not enough to sell somebody on it. You've got to have some more information. The other way we can encourage them is to encourage them to use audiobooks. I can't stand them personally because I read too fast and an audiobook takes too long, but some people really love them, and reading along with them could certainly help someone who's having difficulty picturing in their head what's going on or making sense of all the words. Okay. My personal thought is start with something that they enjoy, right? A book, a magazine, short story. So we do have some textbooks for working with advanced skills. Journey to Success is the book series that we use for adult basic education students. So Kevin, your student is likely to get something in this series. Levels 4 and above are what I would consider to be advanced. Below this level, students are still really learning how to read. And above this level, they're starting to read to learn, right? And there's some flexibility there. That's not exactly an exact science, but
Caitlin, this kind of answers my question. My students at book level 3.
book level 3, they're getting closer,
Yeah.
right? They're still figuring out probably long words, right?
Yeah.
So for them, helping them break those long words into pieces that they know can be really powerful. Teaching them prefixes, suffixes, word parts, that can expand their vocabulary really fast without adding a huge amount of thought. You know, you don't have to learn a whole lot to know that these words are similar, right? If we just change the endings and something about them changes, but the meaning is very similar, right? But by level 4, they're going to be asked more comprehension questions when they get to the end of something, okay? They'll be prompted, they'll be teaching skills like inferencing, okay? All of that stuff is going to start to come out. With our ESL students, I'm not familiar enough with the Standout series to know how much they focus on reading skills. I know that they do, but I don't know where that starts to come out more. If we're talking about students who already speak English quite well, which is what I think Rich was talking about, the 10 Steps series is really excellent for focusing on those specific skills that college level students in particular will need, right? So if they want to go on, or if they are already working in academia somehow, that particular series is really good for those other skills, in my opinion, and I've taught from it. If you're interested in those and you don't know if your student's going to be ready for either of them, talk to your coordinator, right? They do know about these these books. And Christina can also help. Christina is our specialist who helps tutors. There are also some online resources that help them learn some of these skills. Kevin, if your student has already taken the GED Ready, they could qualify, they could be included in this new Readers Press online reading program. Probably for most of our ESL students, this isn't something they'd want to do, because this really is geared towards helping students pass that high school equivalency exam, okay? I wouldn't recommend it for an ESL student. For slightly lower level students, Jeff, your student might benefit from something like this. IXL is another online program that we have available. The difficulty is, I've worked with a couple of students who we've put into this program, and they don't understand it well enough to keep going on it. They don't know, for instance, we send them a long letter with a lot of information, but they're at that level where they can't really understand the long letter, right? So they log in and they try to do it, and they work for a few minutes and they think, well, I'm not learning anything, I'm done, right? So lower level readers, I think, would benefit from it, but they really need somebody sort of holding their hand and saying, yeah, you got that right, try the next one. Oh, you didn't get that, but do you know why you didn't get it, right? So that's sort of encouragement.
We do a lot of that.
Sorry?
We do a lot of that.
Right,
yeah.
Right. For ESL students, and for students of all levels, News for You is a subscription service that we have that's available, and you guys have access to it. You'll probably have to ask for it again. It is published by New Readers Press again. And the nice thing about it is that it really deals with topical stories. So these are, paragraph or a couple paragraph long news stories of things going on that particular week. So I think this week's is actually talking about the hurricane. But there are other things. And these are topics students generally have some interest in because they're hearing about them in other places, right? So this can be an easy on ramp for reading as well. I just talked a lot. Do you have questions for me?
Yeah, my student is a high intermediate,
Mhm.
and she is very, very motivated, very driven to familiarize herself with the English language. And her pronunciation's pretty good. Her reading skills are very good. And so I wonder, I think she's a level 4.
Mhm.
So I wonder if maybe this news for you would be
I
good
would
for
suggest
her.
trying it anyway, even if it's a little easy for her. If it's too easy, then start looking at national press. I mean, anything that's out there on the web that's
Okay.
published is basically fair game. The nice thing about News for You is that it comes with some activities that you can have her do.
Okay.
But
Yeah, I just wonder if maybe we could do that, or maybe if she and I go to a library together and find something that interests her, we could work.
I'm always in favor of visiting a library.
Okay.
I think every tutor and student should do their best to go to a library together. Help her get a library. I think that's going to unlock so many doors for students with kids. There's so much going on at the libraries that they should be taking advantage of if they can.
I don't want to push her out of her comfort zone, because she does go to the library, and she got a book out and she read to me.
Right.
She wanted to read to me and she killed it. She was awesome.
Did she understand it?
That's what I don't know. So that's why I want to go with her, so we can get the book and I can at least take pictures and assign, okay, read X number of pages in so many days, and then I can draw up some questionnaires kind of.
So I would ask her, and I would also use the web. A lot of books at the level that she's at probably have reader's guides, questions already out there put together by teachers.
Okay.
When I was teaching in a classroom, I looked for those all the time.
Okay.
You have to evaluate whether they're good or not, but at least somebody's done some of the work for you.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Caitlin, this is Pam. Could I
Yeah.
add something for
Please.
Rebecca? I regularly meet in the library with all my students, whether they're ESL or American born. And sometimes some of the magazine subscriptions come in duplicate, which is really handy that we can sit across from the table and read the same articles, look at the same picture without being in each other's space side by side, reading one copy of a thing. And also they get Smithsonian at the library, which I get personally. So I bring my copy and then we borrow the one from the library. But whether it's the magazines, the newspapers, books that are of general interest, even a lot of the coffee table books. I had a student who made jewelry as a hobby. And as Caitlin was saying, find a topic that they're interested in, just going through a book on jewelry. And the other thing I use for them, it takes a little bit of explaining that I'm not using the children's section because I think you're a child. We're doing it because it's fast. So I've done American history several times using the children's books. And I show them, children's book is a ½ inch thick, as opposed to pulling 6 volumes off a shelf that you could barely carry. We're only doing this because it's fast. It's not because I think you're immature or a child. And we've covered a lot of ground that way. They actually learn a little bit of American history, which is not our purpose, but in a way it is, because it helps support their children. I have a lot of students who have elementary, grade school children. So I love the library.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree with you, Pam. I think the middle school level readers are fabulous for adults too, because they contain language that's really easy to understand. And yet it's at a level that's interesting, right? And I realized, as you said, Caitlin, several times, that I never changed my name on here. I'm actually Lisa. Caitlin is the coordinator for family literacy. And when I first got on, I noticed that my name was not correct. And then I forgot. So my apologies, Pam. I am going to, if I
Wait,
have
you're
all
Lisa?
of
You're Lisa?
sorry, I'm
You're
Lisa.
What's your
Nice to
last
meet you,
name?
Lisa.
Lisa
What's your last name?
Morse.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to actually I'm going to send this PowerPoint to you. If
Okay.
I know who you all are, I know Rebecca and Kevin Wilson. Jeff, what's your last name?
Straight, like a straight line.
Ah, yes. You attended another one of these.
Uh,
I know this because I looked at the names of the people who attended the last one. You were one of them. Pam, what's your last name?
Mrozek, Morozek.
Okay. Yep.
It means
Heard your name.
icicle in Polish for those who are interested.
cool.
Yes,
Awesome.
it
Neat.
does. And it's close
Literally.
enough to mrożenie, so I know it has to do with cold things.
God bless
I
you.
didn't study any Polish, but I studied Russian. So, Maya, I know where you are. Rich, I know your last name. Kathy, I know your last name. I guess we never got Joyce in here, did we? Too bad. Okay. So I will send this to you. There are 3 articles that I sort of thought you might find, or 2 articles and one site that I thought you might find of interest. That talk about skills that advanced readers need. This one, Rewordify, is a really interesting website that I didn't play around with enough because I didn't have difficult enough text to put in. If you put text into this website, it rewords the difficult words. And then you've got options for ways it will display it. So this might be something for you to play around with if your student wants to read something that's really hard. Or if you want to read something that's really hard. It turned out that what I was reading was not hard enough. Said it could not give me any suggestions for any of the words because they were all as simple as they could be. Since I'm reading a young adult novel right now, I guess that's fair, you know. And the last page of my slide is my contact information. You can contact me, or you can contact your program coordinator, or you can contact Christina Indivina, who's our tutoring specialist. Any of us can do our best to answer your questions if I haven't done so tonight.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Good luck. Hope you have
Thank you.
fun.
Thank you,
Lisa.
Lisa.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa.
Sure, Kathy. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.